Hey guys, thanks for coming by. Looks like it's time for another ranking video in the MCU. Last time I did one was about a month and a half ago when Captain Marvel was released. I cannot believe how fast the time went. Here we are again with Avengers Endgame that just came out. I just came back from seeing it earlier this afternoon and I cannot tell you how great of a movie this was. It met all my expectations, but don't worry, I will not be revealing any spoilers for this movie in case you haven't seen it yet. I'll just share with you my thoughts on it when I get to it on this list. Before I get started, I'd like to hear you guys in your comments. Tell me below, how would you rank the 22 movies in the MCU? What would be your number one? And make sure if you have seen Endgame already, not to put any comments below regarding any spoilers, just so you don't ruin it for anyone else. So without further ado, let's get started with this ranking. Starting at number 22, we got Thor: The Dark World. Yes, this movie is in last place just like before. I feel the same way as I did when I last saw it. Very uninteresting storyline. The character is not a lot of development, especially with Thor and Jane. You feel like they didn't really go anywhere from the first movie to this one. Along with the villain, is not very memorable. The only thing that's of any importance in this movie is the ether, the reality stone, which becomes an incredible factor for Infinity War and Endgame. On a technical level and acting, everything was great, including special effects, cinematography, the action. It was just a storyline that fell flat and made it my least favorite out of the MCU movies so far. Coming to number 21 is Iron Man 2. This one's pretty much in the same place as it was last ranking. Though it's more entertaining than The Dark World in my opinion, this movie still feels like a filler sequel. With a lot of plots and situations going on, it gets a bit messy. You have Tony having his relationship with his father, looking back into that, along with conflicts between him, War Machine, Pepper, Happy, and even the government, and then you have two villains on top of that. If anything, this movie does have a few things going for itself. You have Black Widow making her debut. War Machine has a bigger role in this movie, with Don Cheadle taking over the role after Terrence Howard. Robert Downey Jr. is killing it as Iron Man as always, but nonetheless, this movie does have weak villains, not a very strong plot, and just doesn't seem as interesting compared to the other Iron Man movies or most of the other MCU movies that were to come. Coincidentally, coming in at number 20 is Iron Man 3. The reason why I like 3 more than 2 mainly is because the storyline and some of the villains are a lot more interesting than the ones we've seen in part 2. Though this movie has some good character development for Tony with him dealing with anxiety, as well as one of the villains that I did like, Guy Pearce portraying Aldrich Killian, this movie does fall a bit flat in regards to its storyline. Some of it just feels very distant from the rest of the MCU. At times, to me, it didn't even feel like an MCU movie. It just felt like a movie starring Robert Downey Jr. when he wasn't in his Iron Man suit. And Mandarin, one of my favorite villains in the comic books, someone I was really looking forward to seeing in the movies, turns out to be a fraud. Coming in number 19, Guardians of the Galaxy 2. And I know guys that most of you really love this movie, and I do like it too. It's not a terrible film. The action is great, the special effects are great, the visuals as usual for most of these films. But what made me not like it is that the first one made it so great was having the Guardians of the Galaxy, the main core of the group, together all the time. That's where the real magic was. This movie, yes, they are together for some time, but when they're not, it doesn't feel the same. This movie has additional characters that are added into the mix. There's a lot of plots in this movie. So much going on in this film in over 2 hours. The villain is Ego, played by Kurt Russell. I did like him in this movie, but as a villain, he's not that memorable. Though this movie does delve into the story of Peter Quill learning about where he came from in regards to his relationship with his father, it does feel like a filler sequel. Nothing really new, nothing really that's connected to the rest of the MCU. It's just another adventure for the Guardians of the Galaxy. If anything, the post-credits scene, which kind of foreshadows what's going to happen in Volume 3 or in Phase 4 with Adam Warlock, it does open the doors to a broader storyline that may unfold for these characters. Coming to number 18 is Thor: The First Installment. This movie is one of the better movies in the beginning of the first phase, though it does take its time telling the story of Thor, where he came from, how he got banished, and how he redeems himself to be the God of Thunder again. The special effects and the set pieces, amazing. The villain, you got the debut of Loki, which is one of the better villains in my opinion in the MCU. This movie just takes its time telling the story at a glacial pace. It's a bit slow at some points, and with the film, I feel that this and some of the other movies in Phase 1 were almost like prototypes for movies to come, because after this film and many of the films around this time that came out, movies got better and better with storyline, action, just everything in filmmaking. And sometimes some of these movies in Phase 1 tend to be forgotten about or not as watched as much. Though this may not be one of the best movies in the MCU, it is a worthy addition to the first phase. Coming in at number 17, Avengers Age of Ultron. When I rewatched this movie a few weeks ago, it grew on me even more than the last time, and I think it was because of the combination of all the characters in this film, and the situation that was going on seemed very threatening from the last time that I remember, and just seeing all these characters come together for this one moment, especially in Sokovia. This movie does have a great villain, Ultron, voiced by James Spader. Very menacing, very threatening, very convincing. The set pieces and action scenes are well done, and something that I really appreciated watching this movie again is the color and lighting. Something that is very different in my eyes from the rest of the Avengers movies, so I love that difference that they showed in this film. And along with that, this movie introduced Vision, a character that I've been looking forward to seeing in the movies at the time. And it reminded me of one of my childhood games, Captain America and the Avengers, if you remember that, and it featured all the characters in that game for the first time in this movie. So I love that aspect. And though this movie I do like after watching it again, I do still consider it a filler sequel. It does revolve around Ultron, which is a character that's not really involved with the Infinity Saga, though they do say in the film, Thor says that someone is manipulating everything to have this all happen so they can reach the Infinity Stones, because Thor does have that foreshadowing vision. But in the end, it is more entertaining, and it's a film that I appreciated more and more after watching it. At number 16, we got Ant-Man and the Wasp. This is a great addition to the Ant-Man series. You got Paul Rudd coming back as Ant-Man, continuing his storyline, and you got Evangeline Lilly finally coming into action playing Wasp. The two are great together with their chemistry, fighting alongside each other. I love all the roles in both Ant-Man films. The one I appreciate in this movie, even though it was a small role, was Janet Van Dyne, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. I think she's a great actress, and I think it was amazing that she joined the MCU. Her character, for what she had, was great, and I hope to see her in more future Ant-Man films if she's in them. Along with that, this movie was entertaining in regards to the story. It's just a so-so situation with so-so villains, but with this type of movie, you don't need that. This is a movie where I consider breather type of films, because they're right after these big, emotionally draining Avengers movies, so you need something light, you need something funny, and Ant-Man is always there to deliver. Coming in at number 15, we got Captain Marvel. In my last ranking, it was kind of in the middle. As you can see, it is a little bit in the middle now. I only had a chance to see this movie one time in March, so I didn't really want to move it as much because I didn't get to see it again. I'll say what I said before. I feel indifferent about this movie. I don't like it. I don't hate it. I feel just neutral about it, and that's why it's in the middle of my list. Brie Larson, she was alright in the film. I feel she could have done a bit more with the role. With Endgame, though, she definitely improved upon her role, that's for sure, because she did film Endgame first. But this movie felt a bit simple in regards to the plot and how the story unfolded. It felt like a movie that would have been in phase 1. This movie to me was something I was expecting a whole lot more of, and it just felt like something you would have seen 10 years ago. I know some people might disagree with me, some people may consider it one of the better MCU movies, and that's okay. I just was expecting a whole lot more, though after watching that movie and after seeing Brie Larson in Endgame, it does seem promising to see where the Captain Marvel franchise will go in regards to her now being technically a part of the Avengers. At number 14, Captain America, the First Avenger. I just consider this a classic out of the Phase 1 movies. This is one people will look back and be like, yes, this one is a traditional, good old-fashioned superhero movie, because you got Captain America, the First Avenger, in World War II, a very classy time, telling the story of how he became Captain America. This movie just reminds me of those old serials of the Lone Ranger, along with the Adventures in Indiana Jones. It just comes to par to those type of movies, and I consider this one of the best origin films in the MCU. It tells the story of Steve Rogers being Captain America almost precisely, just like in the comic books. That's why I love it so much. And I love all the characters in this film, Peggy Carter, Bucky, even Tommy Lee Jones in this movie, and Red Skull, the villain, is portrayed perfectly. I just love everything this movie had to offer, and it was just a great prototype for the future Captain America movies that were to come. Coming in at number 13 is The Incredible Hulk. A lot of people may have this movie lower on their list. For me, it's higher because I consider it very underrated. Especially in the MCU in Phase 1, a lot of people tend to forget about this film. And I consider this movie more cerebral than I do action-oriented. It delves a lot into Bruce Banner, how he is as a person, how he's fighting his alter ego, the Incredible Hulk. And this is just like the TV show in the 70s and 80s, same type of storyline. and I think that's very intriguing, and he's one of the more cerebral characters out of all the Avengers. I love the villain, Abomination, especially the scene between him and Hulk when they're fighting in Harlem. And I know a lot of people may not appreciate Abomination as much as the other villains, but I personally like him. This movie I just think is very well written in regards to the storyline of what Bruce Banner is going through. And also, I like this movie because this is the first time we get to see our first connection to the MCU with the post-credit scene of Tony Stark coming to the bar and meeting with General Ross. Coming at number 12 is the first Ant-Man. I like this movie pretty much for the same reasons I like Ant-Man and the Wasp. It's just that with this movie, we're exposed to this world for the first time. We meet all these very hilarious characters, and you wanted to see them again in future movies. And out of all the characters for this film, I love Michael Douglas's version of Hank Pym. I thought he was funny. I didn't know he could be that hilarious in a comedy. And I enjoyed him as well as Paul Rudd and Evangeline Lilly for the first time. What I really appreciated for this film was the special effects, how we got to see for the first time what it feels like to be the size of an ant. And the visuals, the way they were able to create that were really different for any type of MCU movie in the past. So I enjoyed it for that fact, and even though this movie doesn't really have an important storyline, it is just a heist film. It is in the end just a fun movie. As I said before, like the other one, it's just a bit of a breather, just a bit of light fun to get through until we get to the next serious MCU movie. Coming in at number 11 is Spider-Man Homecoming. This movie kind of jumped out of my top 10 from my last ranking, and it's because when I saw Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse recently, that is now considered my favorite Spider-Man movie. But that's not part of the MCU. But even so, this was a great addition to the MCU, especially for Spider-Man. We did see him have a little bit of mini intro in Civil War, but this was his first lead performance in his own film, and it was a great way to start him up. This movie, you did not need to be told how Spider-Man became Spider-Man. We know he got bitten by a spider from the last few movies, so this is different, just showing how a teenager lives his life in high school and dealing with his alter ego as a superhero. And you have a great villain. You have Vulture played by Michael Keaton, an actor that we're usually used to seeing playing a hero, especially Batman, but recently he's been playing a lot of villain roles and he's been pulling it off really well. And though this movie is not as good in my opinion as my top 10 that I'll be talking about, this one does stand out in regards to being a great inclusion of a new character that will be featured more as we go into Phase 4 as he becomes one of the main Avengers. And here we are with my top 10. This time was a bit easier to decide which ones I like the most. Starting at number 10 with Black Panther. This movie, I have said before, it is a bit overrated and didn't seem like Best Picture material, but then again, most of the MCU movies didn't really seem that way. And that's because there's a different breed of cinema. With this film, though, it is very culturally significant, which is a good thing, and I think that's why the movie stands out so much. Along with that, on a technical scale, it is well made. The production design, the costume design, cinematography, special effects, and the score, all top-notch, and it did earn Oscars for some of those technical achievements, as well as the acting. I love everyone in this movie. Chadwick Boseman is the perfect person to play T'Challa, Black Panther, along with Shuri, my favorite character in this film, which is T'Challa's sister. She was hilarious in this movie, very memorable, and I was glad to know that she will be in future movies as well. We'll see her again in Black Panther 2. But the rest of the cast, great. Michael B. Jordan as the villain, he was all right. It's not one of his best roles. Creed, I think, was one of his better roles in film. But overall, this is a good movie, and I do look forward to Black Panther 2 to see what they have in store for us. Number 9 is probably one of my personal favorites, Doctor Strange. The reason why I love it so much is not as much so because of the storyline. It's very simplistic in regards to being a redemption story and how Doctor Strange becomes the Sorcerer Supreme. What I love about it is this whole world, this new territory we're introduced to, the multiverse. Very visual, very psychedelic, just like it is in the comic books. Some of the visual effects kind of reminded me of Inception, but it went far beyond that. So it's very appealing just by the eye. The performances are great. You have Benedict Cumberbatch playing Doctor Strange for the first time. He was the perfect fit for this role. You have Tilda Swinton, and Mads Mikkelsen is playing the main villain. Dormammu's really what I consider the main villain, though we unfortunately don't see him for the majority of the film until towards the end. And other than that little thing that I wish they would have changed, the rest of the film is great. Rachel McAdams was someone I wish had a bigger role in this film, but this is just a special movie to me because being introduced to the mystic arts and sorcery is something I've been waiting for them to do in the MCU, and this is one of the many turning points that we've had in the MCU leading into an entirely new direction to where it may go in the future. And he's also a character that, of course, I'm thinking we will see more of once we get into Phase 4, because we do have a sequel of him coming out as well. At number 8, Thor Ragnarok. Pretty much the same reasons I like Doctor Strange. The visuals and even the music in this film, just like they with Guardians of the Galaxy, reflecting towards 70s and 80s type of vibes. The entire movie feels like that, very retro. But also the story is very intriguing with this movie as well. It's all about Ragnarok and the downfall of Asgard, and Thor is there to try to prevent it. The villain we have is Hela, played by Cate Blanchett, another actress that is perfect at playing villains. She does an amazing job of this. Valkyrie, one of my favorite characters in this film, played by Tessa Thompson, is another one that I really enjoyed seeing on the screen. Overall, this is one of the more enjoyable Thor movies. The first two were a bit serious, so they let Thor cut loose, so to speak, for this movie. It was a bit more down to earth, so it was a bit more comedic, but I think this franchise, in regards to the Thor series, I think it needed that. And I have to mention Jeff Goldblum. I loved him in this movie, even though it was a small role. It was very memorable, very entertaining, very hilarious. And Hulk 2, of course, he was not given another sequel to his first movie, though he's in this film, and is glad that he was added, so you can see the banter between Hulk and Thor and just see how that chemistry unfolds with their relationship. Coming in number 7 is Guardians of the Galaxy, and as I said, opposed to number 2, the reason why this one is better for me is that this is where we have the Guardians all together, and that's where the real magic happens. When the movie begins, they meet each other, and they all hate each other, yet they're after the same thing, which is the Power Stone. They learn to tolerate each other, they fight each other, and they end up loving each other just like a family does, and that's what I love so much about this movie. Other than that, we're entered into a new territory. We're not on Earth anymore for the most part. We're into the cosmos, into space, a new world for us to explore. The visuals and the effect of that are amazing. I love how they make it look in this movie, and with Volume 2 as well. But this movie, like I said, what made it work is the cast, and we have so many other actors that make special appearances as well. To name a few, John C. Reilly, Glenn Close, and Benicio del Toro, and then you have the main cast as well. Just a very entertaining movie to watch, and on top of that, this was a character, the Guardians of the Galaxy, this was a type of comic book that I wasn't familiar with, and I grew up with comic books. So for Disney to take this type of risk to a group that not everyone knew about was a big one for them, but it ended up being one of the more popular movies, and definitely does stand out in the 22 MCU movies that we have had so far. Number 6, the first Iron Man movie. This one kind of got out of my top 5, but I have to keep it in my top 10 because this is the movie that started it all. This is the movie that created that MCU template that would work for future MCU movies to come. Though it is very simple, and it did come out during a time where there aren't as many superhero movies as there is now, this is the movie that we needed to begin with. One about just one superhero, not having all these crossovers, one that just focused on Iron Man, just on how Tony Stark became one of the first superheroes that we know of in this universe. Robert Downey Jr. giving a stellar performance as Iron Man, his first time playing the role, putting him back on the map as a movie star. Gwyneth Paltrow, Jeff Bridges, Terrence Howard playing War Machine for that one time only, but everyone doing a great job in this film. Jon Favreau did an amazing job directing. This is just a movie that should be looked back upon as definitely a classic film, not just in the MCU, but in the years of the 2000s and movies that we would see later on in the future, and how this template can work for future franchises. And now for my top 5, I'm confident with my choices here, guys. Number 5 being Captain America, Civil War. I've given 2 reasons to why I love this movie in my last ranking. One is that this is a movie for the first time in a superhero genre that we don't really have a villain per se. We have the Avengers divided, and they're disagreeing over the Sokovia Accords. You have Team Captain America and Team Iron Man, and they both have their trust, friendship, and vengeance tested against each other. So it's very interesting to see how their personalities clash and how their chemistry is with each other when they're disagreeing so much on a certain issue. And even though you do have somewhat of a background villain, Daniel Bruhl portraying Zemo, it is more so for the Avengers of this film, and I love this film because it's grounded, it feels so realistic, and my other main reason is because it has one of my favorite battles out of all the MCU movies, and that is the scene where they're all at the airport, and this is the first time you see all these many different characters come together for this one big fight. Of course, Endgame and Infinity War have much better battle sequences, but this one is very memorable because in the comic books, this was a big moment. More characters, of course, but they did a great job. But otherwise, very entertaining movie, very, very well written. Number 4 is the first Avengers movie. If you saw my last ranking, this was my number 1. It obviously went down a few notches, but it still has to be in my top 5 because, like I said before, this is the movie that created this big event of having all these characters cross over from other films for the first time in cinema in this one big event. And the 2010 started that, and the 2010 is going to end that with Endgame. But here with this movie, it was very special because it was the first time this happened. Loki, great villain, the Chitauri that was involved in taking the Tesseract. This was the beginning of the Infinity Saga per se, even though the last few were more about each character. This is what really started it. You saw that glimpse of Thanos. But it's very just epic, very entertaining. The characters, just seeing them all interact with each other for the first time is something that none of us will ever forget. If you ever go to the movies within the last 10 years of this decade, I'm pretty sure everyone will remember this one movie as this one time they went and just remembered sitting in the theater and seeing this all for the first time. Number 3, Captain America, the Winter Soldier. This is one of the better written storylines in Phase 2, and along with Civil War, they're both trying different things. With this one, it's dealing with conspiracy and paranoia in a world where we believe the government is our best friend and ends up being something we cannot trust. Here they have Captain America and Black Widow, Nick Fury, to name a few, that are working for S.H.I.E.L.D., and they end up finding out that it is Hydra that has been them the entire time, and there's no one else that they can trust. I just love how, for me, I felt so much paranoia and fear for our heroes in this movie, and it wasn't against some villain. It was against an organization, a government, something that they trusted, and that's the worst type of fear you could ever face. And here you have S.H.I.E.L.D. that they thought they was S.H.I.E.L.D. the entire time, and it was actually Hydra, the very people they were trying to fight against. And the movie is just them trying to uncover this secret and trying to preserve that they are the good guys like the world thinks they should be, and Hydra is the one that's been behind everything. My number 2, Avengers Infinity War. This one I watched probably 3 times while I was rewatching all my movies within the last few weeks, and every time I watched it, I loved it even more. Even though Infinity War and Endgame are 2 separate movies, I do consider this one big 6-hour massive event of the beginning of the end of the Infinity Saga, where we find in this movie Thanos is collecting the 6 Infinity Stones while the Avengers and the Guardians of the Galaxy are coming together for the first time and trying to stop him. I just like how in this movie they have all these many characters from the past few movies, bring them all together for this one event, seeing them interact with each other, and they do it in a way to juggle all these characters to give them all enough screen time, and they have all these different situations going around that as long as you're paying attention, you're not only invested, but you're not confused. And what I like about this movie is the villain, Thanos. He has a motive that you don't normally see in a lot of villains. He wants to save humanity, but in the wrong ways, by killing half of the universe, because on his home Titan, he had people that had no food, and because of overpopulation, people were dying. So he wants to do something about that. So it's more than just dominating the entire universe. He wants to help humanity. He feels by doing that is by destroying half of life in the entire universe. This movie had such a conclusion, such an emotional cliffhanger that you just want to know what would happen next. And we'd have to wait another year to see how this would unfold. And that brings me to my number 1, Avengers Endgame. I'm not putting it up here because I just saw it and I'm overwhelmed with just seeing it a few hours ago. No, this movie was almost near perfect in regards to closing up an 11-year storyline with 22 movies, and they couldn't have done it any better. In my review, I didn't mention this, and I'm going to say it again, that there's only so much I can share about this movie without spoiling it, so don't worry, I'm not going to say anything to spoil it. I'm just going to say that this was the best way to end this story. There was so much emotion to it, so much character development. There was more action in Infinity War versus this movie, but it's so weird. This movie was about an hour longer, and it was just as entertaining to watch. I was so invested with what was happening, and just when it ended, especially the last hour, the last act of this film, it's a big, massive moment. Oh, I wish I could share, but I'm not going to. And the ending of the film is like multiple endings that closes up a lot of these characters' storylines, because as you know, there are a few actors, like Chris Evans, for example, his contract is up. So they figure out really, really intelligent, genius ways of closing up some of these stories of these characters. But yes, believe the hype. It's worth it. This was a great, great movie. I'm going to go again to see it in theaters. I cannot wait. But tell me what you thought about the movie, but don't tell us any spoilers in the comments below. Hope you enjoyed my ranking. Tell me what your ranking is, if it matches up to mine, if Endgame is your number one like it is for me. Share in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I have more coming for you guys in the future. I'm taking a little bit of a break, a few days off, because I've been doing a video day in April for all these Marvel movies, so I'm a bit wiped out. But I have more to come, movie reviews, rankings, top 10s. I'll be doing stuff on TV and Disney theme parks and Universal. I got a lot coming that I want to plan out this year. So please stay tuned. Make sure to subscribe. I hope you all have a good weekend. Have fun at the end game. I'll see you at the movies.